Hello, this is Gina Zimbardi recording her 2025 American Folklore Society Conference paper. Title, Nursery Rhymes Restoring in Interwar America, Nursery Rhymes in Safety Education. Hello, my name is Gina Zimbardi. I'm an independent folklorist out of Cleveland, Ohio. My folklore interests are nursery rhymes, although if you were around this time last year, I spoke on Jimmy Buffett. At the end of this presentation, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, please feel free to contact me at the email below. If you use Zotero or another academic source library and you want my sources, let me know and I can export those to you. My folkloric interest in nursery rhymes is a bit non-traditional. Rather than focusing on the educational development that they impart, I am more interested in the nitty-gritty, interesting historical, or pointed propagandic aspect of these artifacts. My research began by devouring Opie and Opie's work, shout out to the Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes, to then researching the application of nursery rhymes as propaganda tools in different contexts. This year, it's American public health and safety. How this project began was that I found this book, Mother Goose's Safety Rhymes by C.M. Bartrug and illustrated by Marjorie Peters. Published by the Albert & Co. in 1940, this book claims to teach children health and safety lessons in, quote, the most dangerous streets and highways the world has ever known. More straightforward, it says, it is the purpose of this book to teach little children correct safety habits through the Mother Goose rhymes and characters. As the 20th century progressed, the United States became known as an industrial powerhouse. Thus came revolutionary inventions and groundbreaking industrial techniques. With this, however, came the downsides: overcrowding in industrial cities, deadly workplaces, and the rapid spread of infectious diseases. And as I delved into this research, I found something peculiar. Books like these really began much earlier than I expected. Books on safety, and especially public health, really exploded in publication from about 1890 to about 1920, an era known as the American Progressive Era. With that in mind, let's revisit my introductory slide with my fancy title and make some changes. Instead of Nursery Rhymes Restoring an Interwar America, it is perhaps more appropriate to title this presentation something like Two Men's Epic Quest to Use Juvenile Literature to Reinvent Public Health Education in Progressive Era America. Whoops, my bad. I find it appropriate to provide a bit more historical context before I can move on. America at the turn of the century was a wild, untamed beast. It lagged behind its European counterparts in many ways, particularly in public health. While Europe was actively creating international committees to combat the, quote, filth theory, the mid-1800s belief that bad smells from decaying matter and filth were causing diseases, the United States was not even quite on board with Pasteur, Cox, or Listeur's ideas on germ theory and cleanliness. In fact, it's my personal theory that I think if Pasteur had less swag, drip, or whatever else the kids are calling it these days, germ theory would have taken even longer to make its way across the ocean and into American public health. Now, let's use the magic of public speaking to skip the enormous amount of backstory it would take to explain the context and know-how of how the medical field in Europe and America in the 19th century. Trust me, it's a lot, and most of it's pretty boring, and let's get on with things. This story begins with two German-American immigrant geniuses, Emil Berliner and Dr. George Kober. The first was Emil Berliner. Born in 1851, Berliner settled in Washington, D.C. in 1870, where he began his illustrious career as an inventor. Can anyone tell me what he invented? Well, he invented a whole bunch of things, including the gramophone record, the bits and pieces of audio equipment that go into telephones and speakers, and my favorite, the first iteration of the helicopter engine. I posit that the only reason he is not a household name like that Edison fellow is that he had a worse PR team. In any case, Berliner was a strong advocate for public health after being concerned with the high infant mortality rate in DC due to gastrointestinal diseases. He lost one child to this and almost another. At the time, you see, 27% of infants died before they reached the age of 1. Berliner set off to do something about this abysmal fact. One of the things he felt very strongly about was this newly discovered invention called pasteurization. Unfortunately, the American Pediatric Society opposed this idea because they were silly, so Berliner used his own influence and money to create the Society for the Prevention of Sickness in 1901. This wasn't a society of just noted celebrities, rich people, or public influencers. Berliner understood the importance of rigorous scientific testing and set about changing the face of public health forever. He did this by rigorous public propaganda and education. His first step was publishing a bulletin in the Washington Post every Sunday. The first appeared on June 15, 1901, and began with the following. Milk is notoriously one of the best soils for the germination and multiplication of disease germs. Many epidemics of typhoid, scarlet fever, and diphtheria have been traced to infected milk, not to speak of tuberculosis from the same source. Beyond writing in the local newspaper, Berliner understood that change meant educating early, and that meant reaching public school children. Berliner worked with our second genius, Dr. Kober, to write and distribute Muddy Jim, which is the artifact we will be looking at directly today, as well as directly influencing the writing and distribution of other children's literature regarding health and hygiene practices. Berliner used his incredible ethos to establish public health in the U.S. Due to his direct efforts in public health campaigning, and I point out direct efforts, the infant mortality rate went from 27% in 1900 to 9.7% in 1924, where 97% of the public milk supply was pasteurized. How absolutely amazing is that? With that in mind, let's take a look at our second genius. In my humble opinion, Dr. Kober's name should be a recognizable household name associated with public health like Pasteur, Lister, and more recently, Dr. Fauci. Dr. Kober essentially invented what we now call industrial or occupational medicine in the United States. Kober was born in 1850 in Osfeld, Germany. His father was on the wrong side of the leading political faction and thus sent as many of his sons as he could to the United States to escape the whole German Revolution thing happening in the mid-19th century. When he arrived in the U.S. in 1866, Kober met up with his brother Charles in Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, where he joined the army and became a hospital attendant. He was fascinated with medicine and quickly fell under the tutelage of Dr. Joseph Wright and Dr. Robert Burns, big names in medicine at the time. They sort of lovingly forced him through general medical classes. His medical genius was noted even then, and he was shipped off to study medicine in D.C. in 1871 under the Surgeon General, Dr. John Woodworth, in the Medical School of Georgetown University. This is important to the story later on, but apparently medical schools at the time were considered jokes even then, and Kober described it as being made up of, quote, ambitious governmental clerks. Kober was again recognized by his dedication and observation, and in 1872 attended special classes given by Woodworth and Dr. E.M. Schoeffer, a renowned doctor of urology at the time, at the Army Medical Museum. After graduating in 1873, Kober attended postgraduate classes and wrote a thesis on the importance of concise, reliable, and replicable laboratory guides. Why am I taking the time to talk about Kober's education when this presentation is supposed to be about juvenile literature? It is because, historically speaking, it's really important to understand that America at the time really had crap medical programs. As Kober described, the doctors in this era were really upstart rich white boys who wanted the respect of colleagues. Those upstarts would go on to practice bad medicine and give bad, sometimes deadly medical advice. Kober had the genius to recognize this and spent his life fighting for change in both medical education and public health education. To articulate how passionate Kober was about his ideas, when he headed to Georgetown University's Public Health and Hygiene program, he was chair to the Committee of the Social Betterment of the President Holmes Commission. In 1908, following the request of President Theodore Roosevelt for a report on social welfare and health, Kober writes, "The question of health is intimately connected with the physical, social, and moral welfare of the human race and places an important role in the prosperity of countless numbers of our fellow beings, whose only income is the product of their daily labor. It will be readily conceded that health is the chief asset of the working man, and no greater calamity can befall him than when his earning capacity is impaired or arrested by reason of sickness or disability. It means, in many instances, the utter financial ruin of the family and doubtless one of the most potent causes of want and poverty. Now, with all that wondrous background knowledge, let's bring these two geniuses together. Somewhat of an aside, but I had to mention it because I was so excited to find this, and I threatened to spontaneously hug a random library archivist named Ryan from the National Medical Library. Jumping back on track, it is uncertain yet, I have ideas, how Berliner and Kober became friends, but the NML have handwritten letters between Berliner and Kober regarding their public health collaboration, including early discussions on Muddy Jim. I have printouts of them here and I can pass them around. I'm in the process of transcribing the handwriting so that I can read them more easily. This ephemera is an astounding artifact, and I really hope I can bring it to light in later projects. These two geniuses collaborated to create Muddy Jim in 1919 while Berliner was the president of the Tuberculosis Society of Washington, D.C., and Dr. Kober was the dean of Georgetown Medical School. Muddy Jim is organized in 11 core tenets outlined by Dr. Kober. In fact, in some of the full publications of Muddy Jim, there's an insert by Kober that contains excerpts from his 1908 book, Industrial and Personal Hygiene. These core tenets really emphasize Kober's public health mindset of the time. I also have a card copy of these that I'll pass around. They contain my notes, don't mind those. But his 11 health rules are as follows. Number 1, cleanliness as a means for preserving health. 2, fresh air and sunlight, the foes of disease germs. 3, the danger of house dust, what is a cold. 4, how food may harbor or carry sickness. 5, milk and model food in model breeding ground for disease germs. 6, the beauty and value of good teeth. 7, a cool draft of water, one of nature's choicest gifts. 8, avoid tobacco and sportiness in general. 9, we are all our brother's keepers. 10, the reward of good health, one serving your country. And 11, the effect of cheerfulness and kindness. As we begin to look at these illustration and rhymes, I will refer to some of the core tropes that appear in nursery rhymes as outlined in children's literature scholars such as Opie and Opie, Bishop, Dundee's, Halliwell, and others. Although I doubt we'll have time to go over every single jingle in the book, but I do have them all on my slide deck if you're interested. The core tropes I noticed in the books are peer pressure, mother knows best, religion, anachronistic or wrong info, current events and policies, morality, health and safety lessons, and whimsy. The title rhyme, Muddy Jim, is a feast for the eyes in terms of visual rhetoric, and an excellent example of how peer pressure is used in nursery rhymes. Here we have a tableau of a dirty young man with torn stockings and visible dirt on his face, fresh from a bout of playing hoop and stick. He is gazing longingly at the beautifully made-up girls who are perfectly dressed in bright colors. This is all framed in the foreground of a pristine white background to further enhance clean versus dirty. The common trope used in this jingle, and indeed many other in this book, is peer pressure to get across a point. In this case, it's being clean. Let's go ahead and read the jingle. A naughty lad was Muddy Jim. He hated soap and water. Nice little girls wouldn't speak to him, though he wished and thought they ought to. He didn't bathe but once a month, his nails he didn't trim, his hair uncombed. Oh, what a dunce was naughty Muddy Jim. Here we have a jingle that teaches young children the tenets of cleanliness and morality. If you want pretty girls to like you, you ought to bathe more than once a month, trim nails, and comb your hair. I find that while the poems do convey peer pressure tactics, the illustrator J.A. Whitestone, who I could find sadly very little information about, did a wonderful job conveying pathos and peer pressure through her gorgeous illustrations. These three examples here for you are 1. Snaggletooth Susan. I'll talk more about the poem in a bit, but here we have a young lady who's depicted not very attractively and then with a sore tooth. But as you can see, the lower image depicts two fastidiously made up girls brushing their teeth. Note that they are in pretty dresses and are generally more, quote, pretty than Susan. Here the peer pressure is to obviously get kids to brush their teeth, lest they are bestowed with an awful moniker like Snaggletooth. 2. The second image pits siblings against each other with peer pressure. You can see The daughter is washing up before eating, which is the correct healthy thing to do. However, her brother, noticeably dirty and disheveled, is being scolded by mom. 3. The third illustration, which is my absolute favorite, is another feast of visual rhetoric. It's from the poem called King Nicotine, and if you look at the young man who is smoking, he's depicted as gaunt and weak. Also, the king is portrayed as a devil-like character, and so obviously evil. Throughout Money Jim, we do see depictions of mothers that convey the visual and trope of what I call mother knows best, in which a parental figure, most often the mother, is conveying a lesson to the child. 2 great examples from Money Jim are Snaggletooth Susan and the Horrid Fly. Snaggletooth Susan reads, "Her teeth did Susan never brush, she washed and dressed all in a rush. Her mother used to scold her. And soon her teeth became decayed, they chipped and broke, sad to relate, and Snaggletooth they called her. Poor Susan suffered awful pain, she promised not to miss again, to use her brush and powder, that's all I know about her." The second is The Horrid Fly, which the narrator child is asking her mother about a health issue. The poem opens with, "Mother, will you tell me why we are told to swat the fly?" And then the mother responds to talk about how flies carry disease and germs and must be killed on sight. Next, we have religion. Religion is often portrayed in nursery rhymes, and in Money Jim, we have the rhyme Thoughts and Health, which talks about the idea of being healthy is also a religious quality, and if you're unhealthy, you're immoral. There's a lot more to say on this, but moving on. The image on the right is from the poem The Busy Sun, and while the poem itself isn't about religion, I wanted to point out the fantastic imagery of the germs. At this time, the general public barely believed in germ theory, let alone had any idea of what they might look like. J.A. Whitestone illustrated them as little devils dying in God's sun rays. I love them. It's my second favorite image. It's just great. Just really great little stick figures with their little pointing sticks. There are a few other religious jingles in this book as well, but I'm not covering them here. The next and another common trope in nursery rhymes is anachronistic information. An example of this, or an example of anachronisms in nursery rhymes is Little Miss Muffet. We don't use the word tuffet today, but everyone knows what it means because of the nursery rhyme. In the case of When Liza Sweeps, we have the wrong information, like old information, that does transmit germs. And again, I invite you to check out this amazing visual representation here of an early 20th century dwelling. Here we have my favorite illustration from Money Jim, which is from King Nicotine. Often nursery rhymes convey political messages. In case you didn't know, but social groups like the U.S. Women's Temperance League, among others, were instrumental in passing prohibition laws that would sweep the nation in just a few short months after this book was published. Tuberculosis groups, as well as other health-related committees, were quite vocal against tobacco, which I found very surprising given the era. In my mind, everyone smoked in 1920. However, the science understanding the poison in these products were known even then, in seeing that being taught in this rhyme. Political relevance is again a common trope in rhymes. I wish I had more time to talk about this amazing illustration. Unfortunately, we do not. Moving on. Morality is another common trope we see. I will also point out that health and cleanliness was a moral issue to Berliner and Kober. I don't have time to talk about it, but there's an underlying thread that A, if you were unhealthy as a child and you survived, you'd grow up to be immoral. And B, your health was in your hands, and if you failed to be healthy, you were a bad person. As a disabled and chronically ill person, I take personal offense to this, but we don't have time for my personal soapbox. However, morality, big feature in these nursery rhymes. And again, we see the polite things to do in these images. Next, we have rhymes concerning health and safety as shown here in The Gentle Cow. As I mentioned earlier, pasteurization was such an important belief held by both Berliner and Kober, and so of course it was included in Money Jim. Here we have The Gentle Cow. When milk is raw just from the farm, it is full of germs, which may do harm. But safe it is and highly prized when it's boiled or pasteurized. Ice cream, cheese, and butter fat come from milk. You all know that. Made from raw milk, we can see they might harm both you and me. And I love the image at the bottom of the little kid, of the toddler, reaching out for the milk there. I think it's pretty funny. Next, we have whimsy. Finally, we have whimsy. I feel like whimsy is often overlooked or not mentioned enough in nursery rhyme scholarship. Perhaps it doesn't seem quite academic enough, but whimsy in nursery rhymes should not be overlooked. It's amazing. It's gorgeous. I think the illustration in The Silent Healer, which is a poem about the benefits of sleep, it also incorporates religion, really captures a sense of whimsy here. The illustrations, they're just perfect. And so finally, we conclude. The three main conclusions I hope that you gathered from this presentation, and I'm sorry I talk so quickly, it just has to be done, is one, that Emil Berliner and Dr. Kober were, and I use this in a literal way, awesome men. What they accomplished in public health is simply breathtaking. 2, further, their work really represents what I believe the United States was all about during the Progressive Era. These men truly believed in seeing positive changes in their environment, and they cared very deeply about the health and happiness of every person, not just the rich or the white. And 3, finally, and the most relevant to my interests, is that nursery rhymes are amazing archaeological artifacts, and when studied, give us excellent insight into important historical contexts. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to me excitedly ramble about this amazing topic. On the next slide, I have questions for you that I hope you can help answer. I'll bring this slide up when it's Q&A time, but thanks again, and feel free to approach me anytime throughout the rest of the conference. I am more than happy to chat more. Thank you.